On the world map, there is a country where, within the same borders, you can stand on the highest peak of the entire Western Hemisphere, and then just several hundred kilometers away, touch the lowest point of that same hemisphere. The same country, the same map. But this is not the most peculiar thing about Argentina. The most peculiar thing is this. The country's name is based on a myth that never existed. An entire territory of over 2.7 million square kilometers was named based on rumors of silver that, in reality, no one had ever seen. And that very geographical mistake became the name of a country to this very day. So how did geography create Argentina? And why did what seemed like obstacles become the very thing that shaped the identity of an entire nation? Argentina is not a country that fits neatly into any mold. It stretches over 3,600 kilometers from north to south, running from the tropical regions bordering Bolivia in the north through the endless plains of the Pampas down to the point of land on Earth closest to Antarctica in the south. It is the 8th largest country in the world and the 2nd largest in South America, after only Brazil. But size isn't the most important thing about Argentina. The most important thing is its extremes. No other country on the planet contains so many contrasting types of terrain within a single border. There is no other country whose geography so strongly determines its cultural identity, political history, and even the fate of the people who live there. But to understand that, we must start with a geological collision that occurred millions of years ago. To the west of Argentina lies the Andes, one of the longest and most majestic mountain ranges on Earth. The Andes did not simply appear. It is the product of a colossal battle between two tectonic plates, occurring silently and continuously beneath the ocean's surface. The Nazca Plate, one of the fastest moving oceanic plates on the planet, is plunging beneath the South American plate at a speed of about 77 millimeters per year. As the oceanic plate subducts, the entire western edge of the South American continent is pushed upward, rock layers were folded, twisted, and thrust upward, and after tens of millions of years, the Andes rose from the sea like a colossal wall along the entire length of South America. And the highest peak of that wall is located right on Argentine territory. Aconcagua, standing at an elevation of 6,961 meters, is the highest peak outside of Asia. It is higher than any mountain in the Americas, Africa, Europe, or Oceania. It is the highest peak in the entire Western Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. But the strange thing about Aconcagua is not its height. What's strange is this. Aconcagua does not have a permanent snow cover, contrary to what one would imagine for a mountain nearly 7,000 meters high. This is the first paradox created by Argentina's geography. Aconcagua is located in the central section of the Andes, in a region where the rain shadow created by the mountains themselves blocks most of the moisture from the Pacific Ocean. Westerly winds blow in from the ocean, climb the western slopes, release all their rain and snow on the Chilean side, and then blow over to the eastern side of the Andes as a drier, warmer wind. As a result, the area around Aconcagua is extremely arid, despite the mountain being at an altitude nearly as high as Everest. The upper part of Aconcagua is bare rock, lacking the vast snowfields typically found in the Himalayas. That is why climbers can approach Aconcagua via the northern route, without necessarily needing complex rock climbing equipment, although the temperature and wind remain extremely dangerous adversaries at that altitude. But if Aconcagua is Argentina's peak, then its nadir is far more astounding. Less than 2,000 kilometers south of Aconcagua, as the crow flies, located in the wilderness of Santa Cruz province, is Laguna del Carbón, a small salt lake situated within an endorheic basin at a depth of 105 meters below sea level. This is the lowest point in the entire Western and Southern hemispheres, and also one of the 7 lowest points on the Earth's surface. Stop and think about this for a moment. From the highest peak to the lowest point of the same hemisphere, all lie within the territory of Argentina. No other country in the Western or Southern Hemisphere can make the same claim. Laguna del Carbón exists due to a geological process completely different from that of Aconcagua. Instead of being uplifted by tectonic collision, This area is a completely enclosed endorheic basin. Rainwater and snowmelt flow down into it but have no outlet to the ocean. There are no rivers, no drainage creeks. The only way for the water to escape is through evaporation. And over millions of years of continuous evaporation, all the minerals and dissolved salts in the water have been left behind, creating an extremely saline and harsh environment. The landscape surrounding Laguna del Carbón is one of the most desolate parts of Patagonia. The wind blows ceaselessly. Pale white salt flats stretch out under a grey sky, and dinosaur fossils lie scattered in the ground below. Two extremes. The same country, separated by less than 2,000 kilometers. This is no coincidence. It is a direct consequence of geography. But Argentina's geographical paradoxes do not stop there. Deep in the Santa Cruz province, not far west of Laguna del Carbón, lies one of the most peculiar geographical features remaining on this planet, the Perito Moreno Glacier. In a world where nearly all glaciers are melting and receding due to climate change, Perito Moreno has for decades been a rare exception. It has remained almost unchanged in size, maintaining a state of equilibrium while the rest of the global glacial system collapses. This occurs because Perito Moreno is fed by the southern Patagonian ice field, one of the largest freshwater reserves on Earth outside the polar regions. This ice field, originating from the high altitudes of the Andes and receiving enormous snowfall from Pacific winds, has pumped ice downward fast enough to offset the melting at the glacier's terminus. Perito Moreno stretches for 30 kilometers, with a width of 5 kilometers at its terminus where it meets Lake Argentino. The face of the glacier stands up to 60 meters tall, a deep blue like lapis lazuli, and it is no coincidence that this has become one of South America's most visited natural landscapes. But since the year 2022, even Perito Moreno can no longer escape the machinery of climate change. The glacier began to retreat. Between 2018 and 2022, it was thinning at a rate of 4 meters per year. By 2024, that rate had doubled to 8 meters per year. The thunderous cracks of calving ice falling into the lake have become louder, more frequent, and the icebergs breaking off have grown larger. Scientists predict that at some point in the near future, the glacier will undergo a catastrophic retreat before restabilizing in a narrower valley behind it. Perito Moreno is not just a beautiful glacier to photograph. It is a living document of geological processes unfolding before our very eyes, a reminder that geography is not static, but something that breathes, changes, and responds to the world around it. And perhaps nowhere in Argentina is the interplay between geography and human destiny more clearly illustrated than in the country's extreme south. Ushuaia. The city's name in the language of the native Yagan people means bay facing west. Today, it is known as the city at the end of the world. This is the southernmost city on the planet, wedged between the steep, snow-capped peaks of the Andes and the frigid waters of the Beagle Channel, less than 1,000 kilometers from Antarctica. The history of Ushuaia is a clear story of how geography determines destiny. In the early 20th century, the Argentine government chose Ushuaia as the site for a prison for its most dangerous inmates. The reason was purely geographical: its complete isolation, the surrounding treacherous seas, the harsh weather, and its incredibly remote distance from any other inhabited place. No one could escape Ushuaia not because of prison walls, but because geography itself was the perfect prison. The prison closed in 1947, but Ushuaia did not disappear. It transformed itself. The very extreme isolation that once made it the perfect place of confinement has now become its key economic asset. Ushuaia is the only deep-water port capable of servicing scientific and tourist expeditions to Antarctica. Every year, tens of thousands of tourists flock here to cross the Drake Passage from Ushuaia, one of the world's most perilous seas, to set foot on the last icy continent. Ushuaia has turned its extreme geographical location into a competitive advantage that no other city on Earth can replicate. This is the first lesson of Argentine geography. What looks like a disadvantage is often an advantage waiting to be seen correctly. But if southern Argentina is where geography created isolation, Then the north is where geography has created one of the planet's most spectacular water displays, Iguazu Falls. Located at the triple frontier between Argentina and Brazil, Iguazu is the largest system of waterfalls in the world. The Iguazu River originates on the Paraná Plateau in Brazil, flowing through dense rainforest before encountering a geological fault. Here, the underlying basalt rock layer abruptly ends, and the entire river plunges over a 2.7-kilometer long cliff, creating some 275 separate waterfalls cascading simultaneously. But the jewel of this system, the feature every visitor seeks out, is Garganta del Diablo, or the Devil's Throat. This is a massive U-shaped chasm where half of the Iguazu River's entire flow crashes down into a misty abyss. The average flow of Iguazu in this area is about 1,750 cubic meters per second, meaning that every second, enough water to fill a large room thunders through the Devil's Throat. Iguazu Falls is not beautiful by chance. It is beautiful because of geography. The Paraná's basalt plateau is evidence of massive volcanic eruptions that occurred about 132 million years ago when the South American plate began to separate from Africa. The basalt layer, thousands of meters thick, forms the rigid surface of the plateau. When the geological fault appeared, the water had no other way to go but straight down. The result is one of the most magnificent landscapes on the planet, recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site since 1984. But Iguazu is not just beautiful in an aesthetic sense. It is the natural geographical border between Argentina and Brazil, a boundary that requires no walls or fences because nature has drawn it more clearly than any diplomatic treaty. But this is just a small part of the story. Because while all those magnificent geographical landscapes were shaping Argentina's surface, its history was built upon one of the world's strangest geographical mistakes. Let's go back to the 16th century. When the first Spanish sailors crossed the Atlantic and approached the eastern coast of South America, they heard a story from the indigenous people they met. The story told of a legendary mountain of silver named Sierra de la Plata, where silver flowed from the earth like water. Explorers like Sebastian Cabot heard this story and immediately believed it, not because they were gullible, but because in the 16th century, such stories were often true in South America. Just a decade earlier, the Spanish had found the very real treasures of the Aztec and Inca empires. Why couldn't a mountain of silver exist? Cabot named the massive estuary he found the Rio de la Plata, meaning the River of Silver, because he believed it led to that legendary silver mountain. And the vast territories surrounding that river gradually took the name Argentina, derived from the Latin word argentum, which means silver. But there was never any silver mountain. Argentina is one of the poorest countries in South America in terms of precious mineral resources like gold and silver. The continent's real treasures were in Bolivia and Peru. The name Argentina is a monument to colonial hype, built on stories that were never verified. And that hype was completely refuted by actual geography. But there is an interesting paradox here. Although Argentina had no silver mountain, its actual geography created something far more valuable in the long run. That was the Pampas Plains. The Pampas stretch from central to northern Argentina, covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of flat land. This is no ordinary land. It is one of the most fertile agricultural lands on the planet, with black soil meters deep, accumulated over millions of years of plant decomposition. A temperate climate, sufficient rainfall, and flat terrain create ideal conditions for large-scale agriculture and cattle ranching. It was this land that gave birth to one of Argentina's most famous cultural icons, the gaucho. Gauchos were nomadic cattle herders, roaming the endless plains on horseback, carrying bolas, a type of weapon made of weighted cords, and living to the rhythm of the grass and the wind. They didn't emerge because of culture or tradition. They emerged because of geography. When the land is flat, fertile, and has no natural borders, cattle disperse over a vast area, and only mobile, flexible people living on horseback could manage them. The Pampas also made Argentina one of the world's largest beef exporters in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. When refrigerated ship technology emerged in the 1880s, the ability to transport fresh, frozen meat from Buenos Aires to Europe suddenly became feasible. Argentina, with its enormous herds of cattle living on land where nature provided free food, had an absolute competitive advantage that no other nation could replicate. This is not a story of human ingenuity or effort. This is a story of geography. But geography didn't just create wealth in Argentina. Sometimes it also created history's strangest social experiments. In 1865, a group of people from Wales landed on the coast of Patagonia. To understand why, we must understand the context. In the 19th century, the Welsh language was being relentlessly suppressed by English in Wales itself. The British government banned Welsh in schools. Welsh culture was slowly being dissolved into the majority British culture. A community leader named Michael D. Jones had a bold idea. Instead of fighting at home, build a new Wales in a remote, uncontested place where the Welsh language and culture could survive and thrive freely. And that place was Patagonia. This choice seems strange to the point of being inexplicable. Patagonia in 1865 was one of the most desolate and harsh lands on Earth. Unlike Wales, with its lush green hills and humid weather, Patagonia was a semi-arid steppe with constant winds and drastic temperature fluctuations. No significant fresh water, no forests, no infrastructure, but that was exactly what the Welsh wanted. They didn't want a place that was easy to live in. They wanted a place difficult enough that no one else would want to come, so they could build their community without fear of assimilation. And they did it through the effort of building an irrigation system drawing water from the Chubut River. They turned the arid steppe into arable farmland. They grew wheat, they built churches, they opened schools that taught in Welsh. They even published a Welsh language newspaper called Y Drafod in 1893. Today, the towns of Gaiman and Trelliw in Chubut province still bear the strong imprint of that Welsh community. There are about 70,000 Patagonian Welsh, and an estimated 1,500 to 5,000 of them still speak Welsh as their primary language in daily life. Welsh tea houses featuring the traditional torta negra cake are still in operation, serving tourists who are surprised to hear Welsh spoken in the heart of Argentinian Patagonia. This is one of the world's strangest geographical paradoxes. A perfectly preserved piece of European culture, not in Europe, but in one of South America's wildest regions, precisely because its geography was so harsh that no one else wanted to come. But the story of this Welsh community is more complex than one might think. In the 1880s, when the good farmland in the lower Chubut River Valley ran out, the Welsh settlers began to explore further west, pushing into the Andes. They found fertile valleys near the foothills and began to settle there. But there was a problem. The water in these valleys flowed towards the Pacific Ocean. That meant that hydrographically, they belonged to Chile. And this was the starting point for one of the strangest border disputes in South American history. The Andes had formed the natural border between Argentina and Chile since both nations gained independence in the early 19th century. But a natural border is a geographical concept that is not as simple as one might think. The 1881 boundary treaty between the two countries stipulated that the border would follow the watershed divide, meaning the boundary between river basins flowing to the Atlantic Ocean and those flowing to the Pacific Ocean. This sounds straightforward, but in Patagonia, the geography is much more complex. The problem was that Ice Age glaciers had carved deep valleys through the Andes in various directions. In many places, the watershed and the highest mountain peaks did not coincide. A valley could start on the eastern side of the Andes but have its waters flow westward. This meant Argentina could claim a valley based on the mountain peaks, while Chile could claim the very same valley based on the direction of water flow. Argentina argued that the border should follow the highest peaks of the Andes. Chile argued that the border should follow the watershed divide, regardless of where the peaks were. Two perfectly reasonable geographical principles, but they resulted in two completely different maps, and the two nations nearly went to war over it. In 1902, both sides were prudent enough to avoid bloodshed and invited King Edward VII of Britain to act as arbitrator. His ruling did not strictly follow either side's principle, but instead drew a new border that cut across valleys and lakes, splitting many large lakes down the middle with straight lines. That is why, to this day, there are lakes in Patagonia with two names, one Argentinian and one Chilean, because the national border runs straight through the middle of the water. The Welsh community we just mentioned also became part of this story. The boundary commissioners actually visited the Welsh settlements in the disputed territory and listened to the opinions of the local residents about which side they wished to belong to. The majority of them chose Argentina, and those settlements were ultimately awarded to Argentina. The Welsh came to Patagonia to escape English assimilation. And in the end, it was their very presence that helped define the border of a South American nation. Geography creates the strangest connections. But if geography has shaped Argentina's borders with its neighbours, it has also shaped how Argentina organised itself internally, and sometimes in ways its leaders did not expect. Buenos Aires. This city is not in the middle of Argentina. It is not in the country's geographical centre. It is located on the southeastern edge of the Pampas, right where the Rio de la Plata flows into the Atlantic Ocean, at Argentina's closest point to Europe. And that is precisely why Buenos Aires became the centre of everything in Argentina. When merchant ships from Europe came to Argentina, they arrived at Buenos Aires because it was the first deep water port they encountered, sheltered by the vast brackish waters of the Rio de la Plata estuary. When cattle from the Pampas needed to be exported, the railways that were built all converged on Buenos Aires. When immigrants from Italy, Spain, Germany, and France poured into Argentina from the late 19th century, they came through Buenos Aires, and many of them stayed. The result is an extreme population concentration that is inexplicable without understanding the geography. Today, the Greater Buenos Aires metropolitan area holds about 1/3 of the country's entire population, while the rest of Argentina, which is many times larger, is incredibly sparsely populated. Over 92% of Argentina's population lives in urban areas, even though the country is the world's 8th largest by area. There are provinces larger than many European countries, but with the population of a small town, this extreme concentration is both Argentina's strength and its weakness. This was serious enough that in 1986, President Raúl Alfonsín proposed moving Argentina's capital. He wanted to build a new capital named Viedma, about 800 kilometers south of Buenos Aires, on the edge of Patagonia. The reasoning was purely geographical. To decentralize power from congested Buenos Aires, encourage settlement in the vast empty southern lands, and strengthen Argentina's sovereignty over its sparsely populated territory. The Argentine Congress even passed a law to officially move the capital. Construction plans were drawn up, the budget was allocated, then the economy collapsed, hyperinflation took hold, Argentina fell into a severe financial crisis, and the new capital project died before it could begin. Today, Viedma is a quiet little city on the banks of the Rio Negro, with a population of less than 80,000, showing no signs of being a capital under construction. But it serves as proof that even Argentina's leaders understood their population distribution was a geographical problem that needed solving. They just lacked the resources and time to solve it. But there is another sign that Argentina has always tried to conquer its challenging geography. Route 40. This is not just a road. It is the longest road in South America, stretching 5,194 kilometers from Argentina's northernmost point in the Andean highlands bordering Bolivia down to the southern tip of Patagonia. The road runs parallel to the Andes Mountains, passing through 20 national parks, crossing 236 bridges and 18 major rivers, and traversing nearly every different ecosystem Argentina has to offer. On long stretches of Route 40 in Patagonia, you can drive for hundreds of kilometers without seeing a single town, only wind, red earth, and endless horizons. This is not a road built for traffic demand. It is a road built because without it, much of Argentina's territory would effectively be cut off from the rest of the country. Route 40 is the thread that connects lands that geography has made disparate. And that leads us to one of the most interesting questions about Argentina. Why has a country with such rich and diverse geography failed to become a sustainable economic power? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Argentina was one of the 10 largest economies in the world. Buenos Aires was compared to Paris. Magnificent European architecture, a grand opera house, and wide boulevards reflected a nation on its way to becoming a world power. And amidst all of that, they built Avenida Nueve de Julio. This is the widest avenue in the world, stretching 110 to 140 meters from curb to curb, with up to 14 to 22 lanes of traffic. Cutting straight through the heart of Buenos Aires, this avenue required the demolition of entire dense city blocks to make room for it. Planned as far back as the 1880s, but not completed until the 1980s, it is an urban project that reflects the ambition of a nation wanting to rival the great capitals of the world. Crossing Avenida Nueve de Julio on foot is a journey that requires waiting for multiple green lights. And if you don't time it right, you'll get stranded on a median strip in a sea of traffic. This is the avenue of a Buenos Aires that told itself it was worthy of being the Paris of South America. But why didn't Argentina, with all that geographical wealth, become a global economic powerhouse like the United States or Australia? The answer, again, lies in geography, but in a different sense. The economic strength of the Pampas was Argentina's trap. When the land is so fertile and easy to cultivate, there is no pressure to industrialize. While the United States had to build factories, railways, and technology because it lacked enough high-quality agricultural land to depend on, Argentina could simply raise cattle, sell meat to Europe, and live quite well from it. Argentina's economy was built on agriculture, that is, on what nature readily provided, rather than on what humans create through intellect and labor. As the world shifted to an industrial and knowledge-based economy, Argentina struggled to transition from an economy based on geography to one based on people. This is not a story of failure. It is the story of a nation trying to overcome the very geographical advantages that were once its source of strength. And that led to one of the largest demographic transformations in modern world history. Between 1860 and 1960, Argentina welcomed over 6 million immigrants from Europe. Italians were the most numerous, followed by Spaniards, Germans, French, and dozens of other nationalities. Today, over 60% of Argentina's population has Italian ancestry. Buenos Aires has more people of Italian descent than any city outside of Italy. Why? Because of geography. The Argentine government needed people to work the vast Pampas plains. They needed laborers to work on farms, to build cities, and to operate the factories that were being established. And the Pampas, with a climate similar to southern Europe and its vast unexploited lands, was the perfect magnet for Italian and Spanish farmers fleeing poverty and instability back home. This cultural fusion created an Argentina that is uniquely distinct within the South American landscape. The Argentine Spanish accent, with its characteristic sing-song intonation, is completely different from Spanish spoken anywhere else in the world. And linguists suggest this trait stems from the influence of Italian on the immigrant communities. Argentine cuisine reflects this European blend. Pizza, pasta, and milanesa alongside asado, mate, and dulce de leche. Argentina is South American, but it is unlike any other South American country. And that happened not by cultural choice, but because the geography of the Pampas created the conditions for a massive migration to occur, and that migration fundamentally changed the identity of a nation. Even the Incas understood that. The Inca Empire, the largest power in pre-Columbian America, expanded its territory southward along the Andes deep into modern-day Argentine territory. They established agricultural settlements and ceremonial sites on the high peaks of northwest Argentina. On the summit of Lulailaco, at an altitude of over 6,700 meters, the perfectly preserved mummies of children have been found, thanks to the freezing conditions of the environment, evidence of the sacrificial rituals the Inca Empire performed at the highest points of the Andes as a way to communicate with the gods. But even the Incas had to stop. They advanced south to the province of Mendoza, which today is famous for its Malbec wine. There they faced an insurmountable obstacle, not a military enemy or treacherous mountains, but the climate. The Patagonian steppe south of Mendoza with its biting cold winds and arid land unsuitable for the agriculture of corn, potatoes, and quinoa on which the Inca civilization depended, created a natural barrier that no imperial military or political strategy could overcome. Patagonia repelled the entire Inca Empire, not with spears and arrows, but with geography. And that is what Argentina has always faced, a nation with a vast territory, yet only a small portion of that territory is where humans can truly live and thrive sustainably. The rest is a land before which even the most powerful empires in history had to halt. That is the ultimate and most profound paradox of Argentina. A country that can contain the highest peak and the lowest point of the same hemisphere. A country whose name is based on silver but has no silver. A country with the most fertile land in the world, yet 92% of its population lives in cities. A country whose glaciers are changing while the world watches. A country built by the Welsh in Patagonia, the Italians in the Pampas, and dreams of silver that never existed. The Spanish who came to Argentina in the 16th century were searching for mountains of silver. They didn't find them, but they found something more valuable. A territory where nature has displayed all its extremes, from the highest peaks to the lowest plains, from glaciers to salt flats, from roaring waterfalls to the absolute silence of the steppe. Argentina is not rich because of silver. Argentina is a geography book where every page is a lesson in how the earth was made. And sometimes the most mistaken name is the most fitting one, because Argentina doesn't need silver. It is already a geographical treasure that the entire world misunderstood from the very beginning.